Cynthia Scott, you have a book celebrating God, our founder, at America's 250th birthday. There is a lot to talk about here. Obviously, America 250 is coming very, very soon.
Yes.
And you put this book together. Obviously, you care about this topic, celebrating God, our foundation as a country. Why did you want to dive into writing a book on it?
Well, this book actually began with a prayer meeting. It began with a series of prayers written for a prayer meeting several years ago. And the Lord put it on my heart to pray for the nation out of the history of the nation. And by the time I got to the fourth or fifth prayer, which is right around the Declaration of Independence, I had a moment where I realized God Himself was our founder. And I've never heard anybody really give Him the credit He deserves for it. So that book sat on my shelf in my laptop until just this past spring. And God gave me the opportunity, opened the door for this to be published in a book that includes both narrative, the actual history of God's involvement in our founding, along with prayers for the future of our nation, moments to pause and listen to what God is saying to the reader, and a call to action.
You know, it's so interesting because this topic really sparks so many reactions in people. A lot of secular people reject this idea that God was at the centerpiece of the founding of America. They push back on it. They don't enjoy when people not only talk about it, but write a book on it. Obviously, what do you think drives such a visceral reaction negatively to this idea that God and faith were intricately involved in the creation of America?
Well, ultimately, it's the spirit of Antichrist, right? Any spirit that comes against Christ is that spirit. When it comes to our nation, I mean, there clearly was an attempt to rewrite our history over the last 100 years. And those that really don't care about God don't want to hear about it. But I would say to them, the fact that our nation was founded by God and our founding documents established on biblical principles is good for them as well as us, because nowhere in the world has freedom been preserved like it has in America. And that's because our Constitution and founding documents are based on eternal truth. God is the author and giver of freedom. You can choose not to believe Him, and that's fine. He gives everybody free choice, but He is the author of freedom. So, what's in the hearts and minds of those people? I don't know. My heart is entirely different from that. I desire to see God honored for all that He's done in our nation.
Well, and that's kind of bringing me to the next question here, because America's preparing for this 250th birthday. Why should we be focused on spiritual foundations? Why is this an important time for us to be looking at that?
Well, from a national perspective, we need to know where we've been in order to have a good perspective on where we're going. And that involves understanding the true foundation of America. From a biblical perspective, the Bible tells us to rehearse, to remember the mighty acts of God. And He doesn't say, just remember them in some areas of life. Let's remember them in all areas of life. So as we look back, we know who we are as a people. We know that we were a people founded on a biblical worldview with morals and concern, not only for God, but for each other. And these documents that prescribe freedom for all men, equality, and rights having been given directly from God Himself, this is central to who we are as a nation. And we've got to remember where that came from, because if we fail to remember who has issued these rights to us, we are in danger of losing them.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting part of this, because we've lost a lot in this country with our refusal to really look at the facts when it comes to faith. Again, to your point, you don't have to embrace faith. You don't have to be a Christian. You can make whatever choice you want to make, but it doesn't change the facts on the ground of how America was formed. And one of the things that's interesting when I look at the book and I look at the work that you've done, obviously we know that prayer is powerful, and prayer played a role in the American Revolution. It's played a role in many moments throughout American history. Considering that we're living in such a crazy, chaotic time, what lessons can we take from the revolution and how prayer was handled, and maybe apply to what we're doing now, how we're living now in this country?
Well, if we look at the formation of the nation itself, not even the history prior to that, where the Pilgrims and the Puritans prayed, they were in relationship with God, they took him seriously, they feared the Lord. But even at the time of our revolution, we have the First Continental Congress starting in prayer, knowing that they had to have divine providence on their side. We have prayer all throughout the war, and we have miraculous events happening throughout the war as God's people prayed. And even and then at the Constitutional Congress, or rather the Constitutional Convention, again, we have this call by Benjamin Franklin to open in prayer, to seek God on behalf of what they were building as a nation. So prayer matters. Prayer matters because God responds to the prayers of his people. I don't like to say that prayer works, because prayer isn't this activity that's sort of independent on its own. Prayer is the relationship between God and his people. It's the communication, it's the crying out, it's when he speaks to us. And as we draw near to him, he draws near to us, and he hears those prayers and responds. So we should always be in communication with God. But when we stand in a moment like this, a monumental moment in American history, where we do see threats against our freedom, where we do see the possibility of America departing from her early foundations, we really need to draw near to God and pray that he will keep us on that steady path of freedom.
Yeah, I mean, you look at you look at all of this, and you look at where we're headed and where we've been, and there's so much happening that's positive right now, and there's also so much happening that is still very negative and very chaotic, as I said. And you have these people who, and I said this earlier, but we need to revisit it. They persist in believing that government and faith should never touch one another. There should be no integration, that faith should be this separate thing that is removed entirely from even politicians' lives and how they would govern. Why is that a faulty way to think based on your understanding of history?
Well, let's just talk about human nature. We all operate from a set of beliefs. You can call it religion, you can call it worldview, you can call it a belief system, but there's no way, in my opinion, to separate the actions of a man from his belief system, because we're always going to act according to those beliefs. So someone may say that we as Christians need to separate from our belief systems, but are they separating from theirs? No, they're not. They're just trying to implement a different belief system to interject it into our nation. What we need to understand is, who is America? What is the foundation of America? It is a Judeo-Christian foundation. It is a set of documents based on biblical values and biblical principles. And that's just who America is. Other nations have beliefs, have arisen out of different belief systems. That's their choice. But America is a Christian nation, and that is what has made us a blessed nation in many ways. And to depart from that would be at our own peril.
You know, when you look at America today, despite the division, the uncertainty, the anger, the hatred, how do you see God's hand still at work in this country despite all of that division?
You know, God is a covenant keeping God. You know this, Billy. You know he is. From the beginning, the time of the Pilgrims, he made a covenant with the people that landed here. They made a covenant with him. And twice in history, we see God himself sovereignly returning to that covenant. The first Great Awakening, which happened before the Revolutionary War. And I posit that without that first Great Awakening, without that unification of Christians, in the belief that you must be born again, that we are all Christians, that being a Christian is more important than a denomination, that freedom is for all men. Without that stirring of God, we never would have fought for our freedoms. I don't believe we would be a nation. Then we declined. I mean, that's human nature. And then he met us again in the Second Great Awakening. And that's when we see the great missionary movements, and most importantly, the freeing of the slaves during the Civil War, so that all men could be free. So now we stand at a precipice. And in my mind, what we need is a third Great Awakening. We need that stirring of God to remind us of who we are as a nation, who we are in him, and what is possible if we return to him.
You know, I'm sure you've thought about this, but if you could sit down with the founders and show them, here's America today, here's what you created, here's where we are now, what do you think they would say?
Wow. They went through horrific times. We look at what we're facing right now, and we say we're America's on the brink. Some of us are saying we really are in a precarious moment. They lived through precarious moments. They structured the government of they structured our founding documents in such a way as to prevent us from falling off the cliff, right, into tyranny or something else. So I think they would say, this is why we fought the war. So you could have freedom, and you need to pick up that torch. You need to carry on the freedom. You need to remember who we are, what we fought for, and make sure that we preserve that for future generations, just like the founders established it for us.
When you look at this book, Celebrating God, Our Founder at America's 250th Birthday, what is your hope for the impact?
Really, three things. The first is that God would get the honor that he deserves for the founding of this nation. I want us to give him the credit where it's been stripped out of our history books for the last 100 years or so. So that's primarily why I wrote this book. Secondarily, I want Christians to be armed with the facts about our history so that they can defend our Christian heritage with gusto, being grateful and being proud. I really think that we have a lot of people in this nation that love our country and want to see our freedoms preserved. But when we get into a dialogue, maybe we can't pull the facts up quickly. Maybe we don't even know some of these facts. I'll tell you, I didn't know them until I researched the book, until I researched the prayers initially. So I think that would be the second thing, that Christians, especially Christians in America, could defend our incredible Christian heritage. And thirdly, in every prayer, the reader has the opportunity to personally draw close to God, the God who loves them. And I want that for our readers. I want that for all Americans. I want them to know they're loved and to be in relationship with this amazing God that we serve.
Cynthia, just as we kind of come to a close here, this is such a big topic. It's such an important topic, and we hit on a lot of different pieces of this. What do you want to leave people with today? Because we're about to enter into America 250. We're about to celebrate this. We talked about a lot of the different elements. Obviously, the battle over the separation of church and state. There's the Christian nationalism battle. There's all these things happening right now. What is most important for you, just leaving this interview, that you could leave people thinking or feeling?
Seek the truth. We always need to seek the truth, and seek the truth about our founding. My book is not the only history book that expounds on that. Mine is History and Prayer. And be hopeful, because the God who has stirred us before can stir us again if we return to him. So I think it's really important that we know our true history, that we seek God for our future, and that at America's 250, we put first things first. So let's prioritize celebrating God as our founder as we celebrate everything else that has gone into our founding.
I so appreciate you taking the time joining us today. Cynthia Scott, the book is Celebrating God, Our Founder at America's 250th Birthday. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Billy. It's been a joy to be with you.